Good morning, students. Today we are going to discuss the first chapter of history, that is the rise of nationalism in Europe. A few sections we are going to discuss. I request you to keep the textbook with you, and I also forward you a assignment sheet or a worksheet. You can find out the answer of all these questions when we discuss it. So in the first page, you find that a series of 4 print was printed by a French artist, Frederic Sarro. This normally comes in 1 mark questions. When we turn to the next page, you will find two different concepts. One is the nation state and the modern state. What is the difference between a nation state and a modern state? Nation state is defined as it is the majority of its citizens came together and developed a sense of common identity. Whereas the modern state, defined as like this, a centralized power exercising sovereignty control over a defined territory. The difference between these two concepts is that in the nation state we find nationalism, oneness, a sense of common identity that is absent in the modern state. Modern state is concerned with administering a defined territory. And at the third page we'll find a beautiful long question. What are the measures introduced by the French revolutionaries to create common identity among the French people? I like to give 5-6 points which are important. You can underline those points in your textbook. The first point, the concept of fatherland and citizenships were introduced. Second, they provided equal rights to every citizen. Third, a new French flag was designed, a tricolor flag was designed. Fourth, the French Parliament was elected by active citizens and renamed as National Assembly. We were talking about the active citizens and passive citizens in class 9th. So the Parliament was elected by active citizens only, and they renamed it as the National Assembly. The next point is that a national song was composed. The next point, they centralized the administrative system. The next point, all special taxes were abolished. And lastly, all the regional languages were discouraged and French was emphasized. So these are a few points that was introduced by French revolutionaries to create national identity in France. When we turn to the next page, you'll find that in 1804, Napoleon introduced a civil code. And the civil code is called the Code of Napoleon or Napoleonic Code. It was introduced in 1804. What were the provisions of this civil code? The first point, all the privileges based on birth was abolished. It established equality in France and the territories conquered by Napoleon. Third, it also provided right to property. These three are important points. I repeat, all the privileges based on birth was abolished, equality was introduced, and it also provided right to property. Along with that, there are other provisions also. It simplified administrative system. It abolished a feudal system. It removed all economic restrictions. Transport and communication systems were also improved. These were the provisions of the Napoleonic Code or the Civil Code introduced by Napoleon Bonaparte. When we turn the page, you will find that another concept, that is 3 different kinds of people, those who are present in France, were aristocrats, the liberals, and the conservatives. Let's discuss briefly about these three groups. One is the aristocrats. Aristocrats were the wealthy people. What are the features of aristocrats? They owned large estate. They lived in a palatial building. They spoke only French. Normally 3-mark question. These questions comes. The wealthy people in France were called the aristocrats. They owned large estate. They lived in big houses, and they spoke only standard language, that is considered as French. Second is the liberals. The word liberal came from a Latin root, lib. Lib means free. So liberals were the people who love freedom. What were their three ideas? Political, economic, and social. Politically, they wanted to form a government by consent, and they wanted to end autocratic rule. Socially, they were in favor of universal suffrage. They wanted to introduce social equality. Economically, they wanted to remove all government imposed restrictions, and they wanted freedom of market. The third group is conservatives. Conservatives were those who believe in traditions. They do not want any change. So three groups of people: the aristocrats, the liberals, and the conservatives. And in 1815, the representatives of the European powers, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, met at Vienna for a meeting. And the meeting was called by Chancellor of Austria, Duke Metternich. He was the Prime Minister of Austria. And they assembled at Vienna, and they signed an agreement called the Treaty of Vienna, signed in 1815. What were the provisions of the Treaty of Vienna? Number one, the Bourbon dynasty was restored to power. It means conservative rule was restored to power. France lost all the conquered territories annexed by Napoleon. Netherlands was set up. Prussia was given some important territories. A series of kingdoms were established on the boundaries of France to prevent French expansion. So these were the provisions of the Treaty of Vienna. The remaining class we'll discuss in the coming section.